Paul Kersey is a New York architect with a quiet, comfortable life and a deep love for his wife, Joanna, a woman he practically worships like a small goddess. But that life starts collapsing the moment Joanna and Carol go shopping and unknowingly catch the attention of three young hoodlums. The men watch them closely, follow their movements through the store, and quietly steal the delivery address attached to their order. That one slip gives them everything they need. Soon, Joanna and Carol are tracked all the way back to their apartment complex. The thugs knock on the apartment door pretending to be grocery delivery. Carol answers, completely unaware of the trap, and the second the door opens, the situation explodes. The men force their way inside, demand money, and grow furious when Joanna and Carol only have a few dollars. What begins as a robbery instantly turns into vicious violence. Joanna is beaten badly while Carol is assaulted by another man as the apartment becomes a nightmare.
Mother's getting the shit together.
Hey, let's do this one, man, huh?
You know, man, let me paint her ass.
The violence only gets worse when another mugger strikes Joanna with brutal force, leaving her critically injured. But before the men can do anything else, they hear footsteps approaching and panic. Once they're gone, Carol drags herself across the floor, reaches the phone, and barely manages to call for help. Paul knows nothing about any of this when he returns to his office. His assistant patches through a call from Jack, his son-in-law, and at first Paul assumes it is just some small family issue. But the moment Jack tells him Joanna and Carol have been rushed to the hospital, Paul's entire mood changes. He leaves immediately, and when he gets there, Officer Charles explains that both women were victims of an attack, but he gives them almost nothing beyond that, leaving Paul and Jack stuck in the worst possible silence.
The officer said that Carol wasn't making much sense. Two, maybe three men, she opened the door to let them in because she thought it was the delivery boy from the supermarket.
Jesus, God.
Desperate for answers, Paul stops a nurse and asks about Joanna, but she can only tell him that a doctor will speak with him soon. Seconds later, that doctor arrives and delivers the blow Paul was not ready for. Carol survived, but Joanna is dead. The news destroys him. Not long after, Joanna is laid to rest with Jack and Carol standing beside Paul, even though Carol is clearly not herself anymore. After the service, Jack offers to let Paul stay with them, but Paul refuses. He chooses to be alone with the grief instead. The next day, grief turns into a need for answers. So Paul goes to the police station, determined to find the men who killed his wife. Officer Charles brings him to the detective in charge of the case, but the cop does not give Paul much hope. There were witnesses, but nobody can identify the attackers. And Jack has asked them not to push Carol into looking at mugshots yet because her mental state is too fragile. That leaves the investigation hanging on almost nothing.
In fact, the sooner she looks at the mug books, the better chance she has of recalling one or two of her faces.
Well, talk to my son-in-law, see what can be done.
I'd appreciate that, Mr. Kersey.
Any chance of catching these men?
The detective is painfully blunt about it. Without Carol's identification, their chances are thin. Paul asks if there is any real hope of catching them, but the detective makes it clear that hope is not the same thing as evidence. The men who destroyed Paul's family may simply disappear into the city. While the case stalls, Carol falls apart. One night, Jack finds her awake and tries to comfort her, but she suddenly shrieks in terror, forcing him to back away. Paul, meanwhile, becomes more restless by the day. The city around him starts looking less like home and more like a machine that lets predators move freely. From his window, he watches muggers smash a car window and run off without consequence, and the helplessness begins eating at him. By morning, Paul is no longer just watching. He exchanges $20 for coins, stuffs them into a sock, and tests it like a makeshift weapon. The second his coworker Sam walks in, Paul hides it. Sam mentions that he already told their boss, Hank, that Paul would be coming in because Paul is not the type to let tragedy leave his whole life in pieces. Moments later, Hank arrives with an assignment he frames as something Paul badly needs: a working vacation. The job would take Paul to Tucson to inspect and redesign a property, but Paul hesitates because Carol is still in New York. Before making a decision, he visits her and realizes she has gotten much worse. She sleeps constantly, barely reacts, and seems completely detached from the world. Jack worries that Paul is not eating, but Paul shifts the focus back to Carol, suggesting they find better medical care. That is when Jack reveals he has already spoken to a new psychiatrist who believes Carol needs to be taken out of New York and placed somewhere calmer. Paul offers to come with them, but Jack refuses, afraid that Paul's presence will only drag her back into the trauma.
How the hell do I remind her of that day? Well, you know how it is, Dad. I mean, it happened in your apartment.
You remind her of Mom. Dad, don't make it tough for me.
Paul is hurt at first, but there is nothing he can force. So he finally agrees to take the Tucson assignment, telling Jack to keep him updated on Carol. That same night, as Paul walks home, he notices a man smoking a cigar and watching him. His instincts sharpen. He quickens his pace, but another mugger suddenly steps into his path, demanding money and threatening to smoke him out. Paul reacts before he can think. He swings the sock full of coins and cracks the attacker hard enough to escape. The victory does not feel heroic yet. It scares him. He rushes home, pours himself a drink, and tries to calm his shaking nerves. But after a moment, he takes the sock out again and slowly twirls it through the air, quietly testing the shape of the man he might be becoming. Soon after, Paul arrives in Tucson, where Ames, the property developer, picks him up and begins showing him around. The place feels like another world, and one of their stops is a staged Western film set. There, actors perform a dramatic robbery scene where two men lure out the acting mayor and attack him. The mayor fights back, but he is overpowered, and a third accomplice joins in to drag him away while they steal the town's money. Just when the criminals seem to have control, a lawman steps in, fires in their direction, and warns them to surrender or die. The lawman quickly takes the muggers down, and the crowd erupts into cheers. Paul watches the whole performance, but for him, it does not play like entertainment. Something about it hits a nerve. Here, violence is simple. Criminals appear, the lawman acts, and the crowd applauds because order has been restored. Afterward, Ames gives Paul the map of his property and lays out the real reason he brought him there. He wants a new development design, but with one non-negotiable rule. The hills must not be bulldozed or reshaped. Paul has to build around the landscape, not erase it. Paul takes the challenge seriously, studying the terrain, reading the contours, and spending long hours figuring out how to fit the project into the land without destroying what Ames wants preserved. The next day, Ames praises Paul's dedication after hearing one of his men saw him working late, but he can tell this is not just professional focus. Paul insists he is only motivated by the $20 million investment behind the project, but Ames does not buy it. He senses that Paul is carrying something heavier, so he offers to take him to a club. Except this is not your usual club, but a private gun club. At the shooting range, Ames casually asks how long it has been since Paul last held a gun. Paul explains that during the Civil War, he served as a conscientious objector, refusing to fight, and working instead as a combat medic. Ames finds that amusing because to him and most men he knows, guns have always felt like an extension of the body. That difference becomes Ames's whole point. He tells Paul that Tucson is not New York. In Tucson, a man can walk outside at night with confidence because criminals know their target might be armed.
Muggers operating out here, they just plain get their asses blown up.
Paul listens quietly, puts on the headset, and steps up to the firing line. The moment he shoots, Ames realizes Paul has been holding something back. His aim is sharp, controlled, and far too accurate for a man supposedly disconnected from guns. Shot after shot lands with precision, revealing a skill that completely undercuts his pacifist image. Intrigued, Ames hands him a more powerful weapon and shares a brief story about its previous owner, pushing Paul even closer to a part of himself he has spent years trying to bury. As Paul prepares to fire again, the truth behind his relationship with guns finally comes out. His connection to weapons did not begin with the war. It began when he was a child, learning to hunt from his father, but those memories are poisoned by the tragedy that followed. During one hunting trip, another hunter mistook Paul's father for a deer and shot him dead.
My mother was the other side of the coin. When my father was killed in a hunting accident, some fool mistook him for a deer, you see. My mother won the toss. I never touched a gun since. I loved my father.
That single mistake changed everything in Paul's family. His mother, crushed by grief, developed a hatred for firearms and banned them from the house completely. So Paul grew up with two truths fighting inside him. He knew how to use guns, but he also associated them with loss, pain, and senseless death. That is what makes the shooting range so unsettling. Ames is not teaching Paul something new. He is waking up something Paul buried a long time ago. Sometime later, Paul presents his finished design to Ames. He explains that every one of the 12 hills has been preserved, along with the natural features Ames wanted protected, while the homes and structures have been carefully worked into the landscape instead of forced over it. Ames studies the plans and is genuinely impressed, but Paul is already preparing to leave. Accept it or not, he tells Ames he is returning to New York on the 10:40 flight the next morning. Ames drives him to the airport himself, and before they part, he casually mentions that he slipped a small going-away gift into Paul's luggage. Paul thanks him without thinking much of it, passes through security, and says goodbye while Ames gives him one last invitation. If New York ever becomes too much, Tucson will always have room for him. When Paul returns to New York, Jack is there to meet him, but Carol is not. Paul immediately notices and asks where his daughter is, forcing Jack to admit what he has been trying to delay. Carol has gotten much worse. The attack has left her with severe psychological damage, including PTSD and depression. Paul's grief turns into frustration. He lashes out at Jack for not handling her right, even offering to cover Carol's medical bills himself. But Jack breaks down and explains that money is not the problem. Even after expensive treatment, Carol is not improving.
I'll get other doctors. Who are these goddamn doctors you have?
They're good doctors. God, she's almost a goddamn vegetable.
Together, they go to the psychiatric facility where she is being treated, and Paul embraces her tightly, desperate for even the smallest sign that she recognizes him. But Carol remains distant and unresponsive, trapped somewhere he cannot reach. As they leave, Paul asks what happens if he refuses to sign the papers he was given. Jack warns that the hospital will probably keep Carol for as long as they can, but he promises to do everything humanly possible to keep her receiving care. For Paul, it is another helpless defeat. First, Joanna is gone, then the investigation goes nowhere, and now even Carol is slipping away, while all he can do is sign papers and watch. Paul returns to his apartment carrying all of it. He tries to fall back into a normal routine, picking up his mail like life is still manageable, but the illusion breaks when he finds photographs from his last trip with Joanna. The memories only sharpen the grief. Frustrated and desperate for any distraction, he opens the box from Tucson, hoping Ames's gift might take his mind off everything. Inside, hidden in a wooden package, is a revolver with bullets, along with a few other items. Paul does not immediately use it, but the weapon changes the room the second he sees it. After years of keeping guns tied to grief and avoidance, one has been placed directly in his hands. It feels less like a gift and more like a door quietly opening. That evening, Paul wanders through the city, but New York feels different now. Every street feels colder, every shadow more threatening. As he moves through a park, he notices a man following him from a distance. The stranger keeps closing in until his intentions are impossible to ignore. Suddenly, he pulls a gun and demands money. Paul reacts on instinct. He reaches for the revolver and fires, striking the mugger in the abdomen and dropping him to the ground. For a moment, Paul freezes, unable to process what he has done. But survival takes over before guilt can, and returns to his apartment. Only behind his own locked door does the full weight hit him. His hands shake, his breathing breaks, and the reality of taking a life crashes through the adrenaline. Paul rushes to the bathroom and vomits, horrified by the gap between the man he believed himself to be and the man who just pulled the trigger. The next day, police investigate the shooting and identify the dead robber as a convicted felon with a long criminal record. That detail changes the way the incident feels to the public. It is not just another killing anymore. It becomes part of a larger conversation about a city drowning in crime, where even the dead mugger's record makes people question who the real victim was. Paul returns to work, where Hank arrives to review and approve the development project, but he notices something different immediately. Paul is not shattered like before. He seems calmer, sharper, almost strangely energized. When Hank comments on it, Paul admits he feels better than he has in weeks, though even Paul cannot fully explain why. The act that sickened him also gave him something he had not felt since Joanna's death: control. That shift becomes undeniable when Paul goes out into the city after dark again. During one of his walks, he comes across several men violently attacking a businessman in public. This time, Paul does not freeze, run, or hesitate. He moves straight toward the danger. Before the attackers can fully understand what is happening, Paul draws his revolver and opens fire. Two muggers drop instantly. As panic breaks out, a third tries to react. Paul pursues him and eliminates him as well, ending the attack in seconds. By the time police arrive, the street has already gone quiet. Investigators question the businessman Paul saved, hoping he can describe the man who stepped in, but the victim is too shaken and refuses to help.
Careful as shit.
With no real description, no name, and no clear trail, the shooting only deepens the mystery around this unknown figure, suddenly cutting through New York's street criminals. Afterward, Paul and Jack visit Carol, who is now being cared for at a Christian mental institution run by nuns. During the visit, he admits they should have left New York before everything got this bad. Paul pushes back, arguing that running is not a solution. At some point, people have to stop retreating and stand their ground.
If the police don't defend us, maybe we ought to do it ourselves.
We're not pioneers anymore, Dad.
What are we, Jack?
What do you mean?
I mean, if we're not pioneers, what have we become? What do you call people who, when they're faced with a condition of fear, do nothing about it. They just run and hide.
Civilized?
No.
Neither man says it outright, but the divide between them is now obvious. Jack wants escape. Paul is starting to believe in resistance. That belief is exactly what worries the police. As the killings continue, Inspector Ochoa briefs his team and concludes they are not dealing with random self-defense anymore. This looks like one man carrying out deliberate targeted attacks. Whoever the vigilante is, he is not just surviving encounters with criminals. He is seeking them out and eliminating them with conviction.
By God and Jesus Christ, it's impossible. But until we find a shortcut, we'll at least keep busy. So when the media demands to know what we are doing to apprehend the vigilante, we'll tell them we have definite clues.
Soon after, two hoodlums board a city train and start scanning the passengers. Their eyes settle on Paul sitting alone with a newspaper. As the train empties at the next stop, he is left in the carriage with them. One man keeps watch while the other moves in for the robbery, but Paul does not panic. He calmly draws his gun and shoots both attackers in rapid succession, then exits the train like the whole thing was already decided before they ever approached him. At a press conference, authorities condemn the vigilante and urge him to turn himself in, only for reporters to start asking the question everyone is thinking. Why have street muggings dropped since the killings began? The police deny any connection, but that denial does nothing to kill the speculation. If anything, it turns the vigilante into a public obsession. Ochoa keeps digging. At one crime scene, he recovers small but useful clues, including food items and a sales receipt. They are not dramatic pieces of evidence, but they give him something to work with. He starts cross-checking records, narrowing suspects, and building a profile one detail at a time. While the public argues over whether the vigilante is a menace or a hero, Ochoa quietly starts closing the circle. During this time, Jack drops by Paul's apartment and finds him in a strangely normal mood, listening to music and preparing food as if nothing has happened. Paul seems calm, almost comfortable, and that unsettles Jack more than open grief would have. When Jack questions him, Paul says he cannot stay trapped in mourning forever. It sounds reasonable on the surface, but the calm behind it feels different. Paul is not healing in the usual way. He is finding a new way to live with the damage. Soon after, he stops waiting for trouble to find him and starts setting the bait himself. He walks into a pub, openly flashes a large amount of cash, and makes sure the wrong people notice. As expected, two hoodlums follow him out and trail him into a metro station. When they corner him in a crowded area and pull knives, Paul reacts instantly. He shoots one dead and wounds the other, who manages to escape into the chaos. The thug manages to alert a police officer, who immediately heads down to the station. But in the confusion, Paul slips away unnoticed. Later, he returns home alone and quietly tends to the wound he suffered during the encounter. The wounded attacker is rushed into surgery under Ochoa's supervision, but he dies before he can give them much. An officer tells Ochoa the man only managed to claim that he stabbed the man who shot him. It is not a confession, but it gives Ochoa a new detail. The vigilante is wounded. At home, Paul watches news reports confirm that many of the men he has killed had criminal records. As that information spreads, the city's reaction becomes more complicated. Some people are horrified, but others start feeling emboldened. Ordinary citizens begin fighting back. An elderly woman says she defended herself from muggers with a hat pin because she was tired of being robbed with nobody there to protect her.
But I went to my closet, and everybody better look out for me from now on, because I've been robbed too many times, and I've got enough.
Elsewhere, another man explains that after he and several construction workers heard about a nearby mugging, they helped catch the suspect. Ochoa also receives reports that 12 families in the area have strong resentment toward muggers because of past attacks. The vigilante is no longer just a police problem. He is becoming an idea other people are starting to copy. That is what pushes Ochoa closer to Paul. He becomes convinced the vigilante lives near the earlier grocery store mugging. One officer argues that the theory may not fit, since the vigilante was found carrying groceries miles away after shooting two muggers on a train. But to Ochoa, that detail only sharpens the profile. A man who travels that far, moves that carefully, and shoots that accurately must have money, discipline, and weapons experience. He orders his team to list every man from those affected families old enough to have served in the Civil War, then narrow the list to the wealthiest.
I want a preliminary line on these names. Where they work, service record, reputation, police record, if any. And I want it fast. You know, like today, huh?
Later, Paul attends a party where guests talk about the wave of muggings, but the conversation eventually drives him outside for air. While Paul steps onto the balcony, Ochoa meets one of his officers in a car outside the building and reveals the detail that finally puts the pieces together. Paul's wife and daughter were attacked by 3 muggers, and those attackers entered the building using an address slip taken from the same grocery store connected to the earlier crime. At first, Ochoa hesitates when he learns Paul is a conscientious objector, but that doubt does not last. From a distance, he and his men watch Detective Joe Charles approach Paul and ask about his daughter. After Paul leaves, Ochoa sends an officer to follow him, then uses his credentials to get inside Paul's apartment. What he finds there pushes suspicion into certainty. Paul has newspapers and magazines covering the recent muggings stacked around the apartment, far more material than a casual reader would collect. He is not just aware of the vigilante story, he is studying it. For Ochoa, the obsession says almost as much as the evidence. Shortly afterward, Ochoa meets with the district attorney and names Paul as his primary suspect. He has more than instinct now. Blood traces from Paul's bathroom have been compared with blood found on the knife recovered from a dead mugger, and the results strongly connect Paul to the attacks. But instead of moving forward, the district attorney tells Ochoa to close the case quietly. The decision is not about innocence. It is about optics. Arresting Paul could turn him into a public martyr, and the city already knows crime appears to be dropping. If they expose him, they risk inspiring even more people to take the law into their own hands. So, rather than prosecute him, they choose the cleaner political solution: push Paul out of New York and make the problem disappear.
We want this man to quit, desist, go away, to stop.
So the mugging rate can go up? If I arrest him, wouldn't that get him off the streets?
My God, man, I don't want a martyr on my hands.
All right. I just want to hear you say it.
Ochoa does not like it, but he follows orders. Anonymously, he calls Paul at home and tells him he is under investigation and surveillance. Soon after, officers confront Paul more aggressively in a staged encounter, making it clear that the police are watching him now. Still, Paul keeps moving. Ochoa and his men monitor his apartment, but Paul waits for the perfect opportunity to slip past them. He then retrieves his revolver from his office building, with Ochoa arriving just moments too late to stop him. The pressure is closing in, but Paul is not ready to surrender the identity he has built in the dark. Not long after, 3 muggers ambush him in a park.
Come on down and bring us the money, honey.
How much money you got, honey?
Paul holds back at first, watching them approach, but when they attack, he answers with force. During the chase that follows, he is wounded in the leg, yet he keeps pursuing one attacker into a warehouse, trying to use the space to corner him. But blood loss and exhaustion finally catch up to him. Paul collapses before he can finish the confrontation, and the suspect escapes. Officers arrive soon after and recover Paul's weapon. Ochoa is notified and told to handle the situation carefully while Paul is taken to the hospital. There, Ochoa visits him and offers the deal the city wants. He will get rid of Paul's handgun if Paul leaves New York permanently and never comes back. Paul understands exactly what is being said. They know enough to destroy him, but they would rather exile him than expose him.
Are we connecting, Mr. Kersey? We want you to get out of New York permanently.
Inspector, by sundown?
The arrangement goes through, and Paul's employer transfers him to Chicago. Publicly, Ochoa presents Paul as just another victim of urban crime, while still claiming the vigilante is out there somewhere. The case is closed without closure, and New York quietly buries the truth because the truth is too useful and too dangerous at the same time. Paul eventually arrives at Chicago Union Station by train, where a company representative meets him to begin his new life. But a new city does not mean a new man. Almost immediately, Paul spots hoodlums harassing a young woman. He pauses, but only briefly, before stepping in again. When the attackers mock him, Paul responds with a calm, almost ironic gesture, raising his hand and forming a finger gun toward them. The message is clear. New York may be behind him, but whatever Paul Kersey has become is not finished.
You're probably one of them knee-jerk liberals thinks us gun boys will shoot our guns because it's an extension of our penises.
I never thought about it that way. It could be true.